Death at Daisy's Folly, Chapter 19. It requires a very unusual mind to undertake the analysis of the obvious. Alfred North Whitehead. Charles found the prince at a desk in the library working on papers he had taken from a leather portfolio. He looked up from his writing and said, "I'll be with you in a moment, Charles." As he was waiting, Charles looked around. The library was one of Easton's most beautiful rooms, high-ceilinged and elegant, with Persian carpets on the floors and agreeably placed windows and walnut shelves along the walls under an ornately carved plaster frieze. The shelves were filled with several thousand books bound in scarlet morocco to match the scarlet draperies. Some several hundred, Charles knew, were volumes of theology obtained by one of Daisy's pious ancestors in exchange for several manors on the estate. Above the shelves hung gilt-framed oils of Maynard ancestors and prints of various sporting and military scenes. Reading tables, map cases, leather chairs, and commodious sofas were arranged throughout the large, light room, and on the tables were arranged decorative objects, celadon bowls, Fabergé cigarette boxes, jade carvings from the Orient. It was a place where the guest might gather to read, write, or enjoy a quiet game of cribbage or bridge. The prince threw down his pen and stepped around the desk. "Ah, Charles, I'm sorry you had to miss luncheon. We not only had an excellent ptarmigan pie, but a most delicious raspberry fool. Have you made any progress?" "Perhaps," Charles said cautiously. "Well then," the prince said, "let me hear about it." He seated himself on a nearby sofa and motioned to Charles to the chair opposite. "Tell me what you have found, then," he said, taking out a cigar. Charles sat down. "It is beginning to seem that there is a connection between Wallace's murder and the death of your Highness's groom. Wallace was seen leaving the stable at approximately the same time as the boy died." The prince lighted his cigar. "Your informant is reliable." "I believe so. He's deaf and communicating with him is difficult, but he seems to have keen powers of observation, and I can think of no good reason why he should fabricate a false story." "So, Wallace was shot because someone, a servant no doubt, thought he killed poor Harry, eh?" The prince drew deeply on his cigar, blowing out a cloud of pungent blue smoke. "A cogent theory, I must say. Reggie was murdered for the sake of revenge." "It's one theory," Charles said, wary. "I'm not sure I subscribe to it, however. In fact, revenge was such a weak motive that he couldn't imagine why the prince would give any credence to it. The boy was a stranger at Easton and new to the prince's retinue. What servant would care enough to risk his own life for the sake of revenge? "Of course," the prince said thoughtfully, "the theory does not require us to assume that Reggie actually murdered the lad. He wasn't the sort to cosh a stable boy, particularly my stable boy, for no reason. All we have to assume is that someone thought he killed the youngster. This person, distraught with grief, no doubt, and tormented by the thought of the poor boy's sorrowing mother, acquired a gun, stalked his target until he was alone in a deserted place, and—" The prince raised his plump hand, pointing his cigar at Charles as if it was a gun, and said gravely, "Blam!" Charles cleared his throat. "I fear," he said, "that there is other evidence to be considered." He reached into his pocket and took out a handkerchief that Kate had pointed out to him at the scene of the murder. He handed it to the prince. "What's this? A woman's handkerchief?" The prince examined the dainty lace-edged thing. "Hold on," he said, half to himself. "Here are some initials, worked into a design in the corner. Looks like—" He stopped. "It looks like an F and a W intertwined," Charles said softly. "Francis Warwick. It's Daisy's handkerchief." The prince handed the handkerchief to Charles and turned to tap the ash from his cigar, concealing his face. "Where did you get it?" "In a flower bed, a dozen paces from Wallace's body." "That proves nothing," the prince said brusquely. He heaved himself off the sofa. "Daisy lives here, you know. And women lose their handkerchiefs in most damned awkward places." His chuckle was forced. "I've had to come up with a few quick explanations in my time, believe me, Sheridan. Alexandra may be hard of hearing, but there's nothing wrong with her eyes. She can spot an unfamiliar handkerchief at 30 paces, even under the bed." Charles stood also. He took out the note and extended it with genuine regret to the prince. Before you conclude that the handkerchief has nothing to do with the crime, I think you must read this, sir." The prince's eyes flickered. "No," he said, taking several large puffs on his cigar. Charles sighed, thinking that the denial served no good purposes. "Then I shall have to read it aloud." "Oh, very well then," the prince said heavily. Charles unfolded the note. "Meet me at the Folly," he read aloud, "after everyone's gone to bed. It's written on Daisy's stationery," he added. "I believe it to be her hand." The prince turned toward the window. He was silent for a moment. "Where was it found?" he asked gruffly. "By whom?" "On Wallace's person. Miss Hartley saw it very soon after the body was discovered. She confiscated it so that no one would be tempted to remove it." The prince turned, his shoulders hunched. "No one else has read it but the two of you and myself?" "To my knowledge, only you and I, sir. Miss Hartley gave it to me unread." "Good girl." A smile ghosted across the prince's fleshy mouth and then vanished. He drew himself up, stern. "You can't think that Daisy killed the poor wretch." "I'm afraid that it is a possibility we must consider, sir. After all, whatever it was that Wallace wanted to talk with you about last night seemed to involve Daisy." The prince shook his head in manifest disbelief. "But that's preposterous, man. What motive could she have?" "Blackmail, perhaps. She and Wallace—" The prince snorted scornfully. "Their affair was common knowledge. One can't be blackmailed over something that everyone knows, for pity's sake. In any event, it was over a long time ago." His mouth tightened, and Charles wondered how sure he was of his assertion. Albert Edward might be heir to the throne, but that did not mean that he was confident in his prowess as a man. The silence stretched on for a moment. "Perhaps she was in debt to him," Charles said finally. "I have heard it frequently reported, I've read it in the newspapers as a matter of fact, that the Warwicks are increasingly short of funds. It is even said that they plan to sell part of this estate." "She may be in debt, but not to Wallace," the prince gestured sharply. "If you insist on barking up that tree, go talk to Isaacson." "Ah," Charles said, "you're suggesting that Isaacson loaned—" "I'm not suggesting anything, damn it," the prince said testily. "Just talk to him, that's all. Find out what he has to say." He looked away. "Anyway, a person of pedigree doesn't kill for money." "But such a person might kill for reputation," Charles persisted. "And that is the word Wallace used in my hearing last night. For many, a reputation is more important than the family estate." "Rubbish!" The prince straightened his shoulders, seeming to arrive at some sort of determination. "I must tell you that the lady in question might have made an appointment with Wallace, but she did not keep it." "How can you be sure?" "Dash it all, man!" the prince burst out angrily. "Do I have to say it outright? Daisy couldn't have killed Reggie. I was with her the entire night shortly after we retired until almost breakfast time. She did not leave the room even for an instant." Charles regarded him thoughtfully. If the prince could unequivocally confirm Daisy's whereabouts, why had he not said so at once? "The whole night?" he asked gently. "You're able to swear to that, sir, under oath?" The prince suddenly leaned forward, balancing on the balls of his feet, thrusting his head forward with an angry bullishness. "You dare contradict me?" he asked in a steely voice. Charles stood his ground. "It is a question I am compelled by your own commission to ask." The prince's belligerent evasion had already given him his answer, but that aside, it was not likely that the matter would go as far as a courtroom. The royal alibi, impeachable or not, would suit the purposes of the law even if it failed to answer to the demands of truth. The prince spoke with an elaborate patience. "If you are still too dense to comprehend the obvious, Sheridan, let me analyze this case for you. Wallace killed the stable boy for some reason unknown to us, then realized he had been seen and identified. He shot himself to avoid being accused." He thrust his cigar into Charles's face. "Daisy may have planned to meet him. In fact, he may even have killed himself there and at that time because he believed she would shortly discover his body. But she did not go to the Folly because she was with me, and that's all there is to it. Do you understand?" The last three words were punctuated with jabs of the princely cigar. I must respectfully disagree, Charles said, refusing to be intimidated. I expect the autopsy to reveal that Wallace could not have committed suicide. The surgeon arrived a short time ago and is at work now. He paused. And there is the handkerchief and the note, both which point directly to Daisy. It might be argued that she crept out of the room while you slept and went to meet Wallace and to murder him. The prince stood, unsmiling, saying nothing. The pulse at his temple had begun to beat visibly, and his thick lips tightened. When he spoke at last, his voice was heavy. Are there no other possibilities? Yes, Charles said, feeling a wave of compassion for the man. There was no mistaking the depth of his feeling. There is a quite obvious one, actually. What is it, man? Stop beating around the bush. Charles measured his words, conscious of all that they would imply. Someone may have attempted to make it appear that Daisy is guilty. The great eyes were starting out of the head, and pulsing vein that pounded as if though it were about to burst. But why, man? Why? Why under the sun could that be the reason? You have no idea? Of course not, the prince exclaimed. Why should I? Because, sir, Charles said, you may be the reason. There was a lengthy silence. When the prince spoke at last, it was only to say, in a long, sad syllable. After a moment he added, You will concentrate on that angle, I assume. He closed the subject with a slight dismissive movement of his plump hand. Where are you off to now? We have only an hour before tea. I need to speak to the surgeon and see whether he has drawn any conclusions. I should also have a look at Wallace's room, and I must speak with Miss Ardley to learn what she has discovered from her interviews. Oh, of course, please extend my compliments to your charming associates, whose competence and discretion I am only beginning to appreciate. The prince gave Charles a slantwise look. Do I perceive a connection between the two of you that extend beyond the professional? You do, sir, Charles said. He smiled for the first time since he had come into the room. Kate has agreed to become my wife. The prince hooked his fingers in his waistcoat pocket and heaved an exaggerated sigh. So another American woman is about to invade one of our staid old families, eh? You can't be content with one of our English girls. I have always believed that if I could make a marriage with the kindred spirit, her nationality would be irrelevant. The prince made an expansive gesture. Well, I must say I like the originality of these American women. They bring a little fresh air into society. They are livelier and less hampered by etiquette, are they not? And I do believe that they are not as squeamish as their English sisters, and better able to take care of themselves. Kate is decidedly unsqueamish, Charles said, and most certainly able to take care of herself. In fact, she would protest the very idea of my taking care of her. What a prize, the prince said admiringly. For heaven's sake, old chap, marry the lady forthwith. However, by way of caution, I should probably report a remark of Lady Neville's on the occasion of Jenny Jerome's marriage to Randy Churchill. Oh? Yes, the prince chuckled. I like the Americans very well, Lady Neville said, but there are two things I wish they would keep to themselves, their girls and their tinned lobster. He extended his hands. I do congratulate you, Charles. She is a lovely woman. Thank you, sir, Charles said. Now then, the prince said, returning to the desk, there are two more bits of business. At luncheon, I suggested to the company that you might tell them something about modern methods of crime detection. Several seemed quite interested in the topic. What would you say to us giving us a short lecture after dinner this evening, before the fireworks are set off? Charles nodded reluctantly. He had no difficulty speaking to the subject, but he should have to be careful that what he said did not alert someone in the audience as to his methods and intentions. And the second bit? Well, when you go to Wallace's room, send Kirk Smythe down here, as soon as you're done with him, that is. The prince picked up a sheaf of papers. There are several telegrams to be sent off. I shall leave them here for him. Oh, yes, would you mention to him that I'm about to exhaust my supply of cigars?